Hey everybody, welcome to Crazy Tech Lab, and I've got an awesome video for you today, especially for all you small form factor mini-ITX fans out there, because I have received the EK Quantum Momentum² monoblock for the fabulous ASUS ROG Strix X570-I gaming mini-ITX motherboard. So if you're not familiar with a monoblock, it is basically one of these. This is for an old Maximus, the old Maximus impact board. And basically, as you can see, it's a very, very large water block that water cools not just the CPU, but several other hotspots on the motherboard as well. So for example, here, you're water cooling the chipset down here, as well as the VRMs, all in one large water block with a single inlet and outlet. And with the ASUS ROG Strix X570-I gaming, that has numerous benefits. So with this motherboard, you are water cooling the chipset, which means that you can get rid of that noisy chipset fan. You're water cooling the VRMs, which means that you can get rid of the VRM fan as well. There are two fans embedded into this motherboard, and I can vouch for the fact that they are quite noisy. This has been my my personal board in my personal rig for the last 18 months or so, so I'm well aware of all the issues with it. And this water block coming quite far down in the lifespan of this motherboard, but according to EK, it just takes that much time to work out how to actually get a monoblock fitting on a mini-ITX motherboard, or any motherboard really, but this motherboard in particular, because it's particularly complicated. So not many monoblocks out there at the moment either, which is a bit of a shame, because I always try and use monoblocks myself for the simple reason that they just help to cool a lot of hotspots on a motherboard. In fact, I will even go out of my way and maybe switch my motherboard choice to one that has a monoblock compared to one that has just CPU only water block compatibility. Mini-ITX, obviously, those cases can be a bit stuffy, so water cooling those hotspots such as the VRMs and chipset can be very, very beneficial in cases that are typically rather stuffy and slightly hotter running than your typical ATX case. So this is actually going to be part of a series of videos that I'm doing on monoblocks, mini-ITX monoblocks that is. So today we'll be checking out this water block from EK, and we will be comparing it against a EK CPU only water block in my own personal system, my Event Horizon system, in a Radiantech Ophion Evo, which has a 240mm radiator in the roof and a 120mm radiator in the base. So probably fairly typical of your average mini-ITX PC out there. So hopefully some real world data for you guys to see how this water block performs against a dedicated CPU water block, because obviously monoblocks don't usually perform quite as well in terms of raw CPU cooling. But for me, I would always take a couple of degrees slightly higher CPU temperature for a monoblock, given the advantages that you get in VRM and chipset cooling. So we'll be seeing how the block performs for cooling those things, those aspects of the motherboard, and obviously we're ditching the onboard fans as well on this motherboard, and I'll be showing you how to disassemble the X570-I gaming and how to fit the monoblock. And then we'll be doing some performance numbers later in my own system. And as I mentioned, this is going to be part of a series of videos where I will be looking at every single monoblock that's available for current and nearly current, going back a generation or two, motherboards, mini-ITX specifically. So don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of those videos. Really, really important stuff coming up, and I've scoured the internet to find every single monoblock that I could find, and I'll be testing and looking at all of them here on the channel very, very soon. So don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, and don't forget to like and comment on this video as well. Did you find it informative? What do you think of the EK water block, and what do you think of the ASUS motherboard as well? Is that your own personal motherboard at the moment? Are you considering buying it, especially now that we've got another CPU in the form of the Ryzen 5800X3D. So that's given all AMD chipsets a new lease of life until AM5 turns up, hopefully later this year or maybe early 2023 if the latest rumor is to be believed. But anyway, let's crack on with the video and we can start dismantling this motherboard, fitting the water block and seeing how it performs. Okay, so here is my Event Horizon build, and as you can see, we've got a 240mm radiator in the roof and a single 120mm radiator in the base as well, with mostly EK hardware in here. And what we're going to do is compare the results of the standard EK monoblock, I think that's just a Supreme or something like that down there, against this baby. So what we've got is the EK Quantum Momentum², and this is, as I mentioned, for the ASUS ROG Strix X570-I gaming D-RGB. So that's the actual water block that we've got here. And what we'll do is a quick unboxing to see what we get in the box. And just your standard EK packaging. And here is the water block. So it's a pretty unique design because this motherboard is not an easy motherboard to water cool. I'm surprised that EK decided to do it, given how complicated it is, but it is a pretty popular motherboard. So obviously what we'd like to see monoblocks for the Gigabyte motherboard, the X570-I Aorus, but yeah, we'll just have to wait to see what happens with that one, because I know that's another popular motherboard. So as per usual, you get the Thermal Grizzly thermal paste, thermal pads to connect the monoblock to the VRMs and those things. And let's just get this thing out and have a detailed look at it. So let's get rid of the box. And here we go. So we've got the super duper EK exact mount. I absolutely love this thing. I'm using it on a couple of water blocks at the moment. Just so much easier dealing with these than having thumb screws on the top side. The only downside is that you need to access the rear of the motherboard in order to actually get to remove the water block, or monoblock in this case. So as we can see on the underside, you've got direct contact with the chipset via, let me just put that down there like I'm actually pointing at stuff. So you've got the chipset contact down here, then you've got the VRM contact up here, and underneath here, underneath the exact mount, I won't undo it now because it will take a couple of minutes and I'll just be fiddling around and wobbling everywhere. Underneath there, you've just got the standard water block mount as well. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of things going on here as well. So single inlet and outlet, which is down here. Now the only issue I can see here is that that's basically where the CPU sits. As you can see, that kind of lines up with the CPU cooling section underneath, and that's some way off where you would normally have the inlet and outlet. So they would normally sit there and there, whereas we've now got them here and here. So not a massive deal if you're building a new system, but for me, with the hard tubing that I've got in this loop, that's going to mean that I'm going to have to rejig the tubing, probably cut some to lengths, maybe make a couple a bit longer, reroute some things and that kind of stuff, which is a little bit of a pain. It's a shame that EK couldn't have worked out some way to mount them in pretty much the same place, or at least a similar place, rather than a couple of inches to one side. So just bear that in mind, that this won't be a straight swap for a water block, not by any way, shape or form. The ports are considerably further away from you know, the ATX connector and that kind of stuff, and much closer to the I/O panel on your motherboard. So yeah, it's a pretty gorgeous monoblock, pretty hefty as well, and it's going to fully cover the ASUS ROG Strix X570-I gaming PCB pretty much. And all that's left now is to dismantle the motherboard, so we'll do a quick walkthrough of that. So this is my ASUS ROG Strix X570-I gaming, and as you can see down there, I've got a AMD Ryzen 5600X. I've had all sorts of CPUs in this over the last 18 months or so. Typically switch to a Ryzen 5000 when I'm not testing them, but at the moment I'm doing a few processor group tests and some extra testing and that kind of stuff. And we've had the 12900 KS released, and obviously the 5800 X3D, and I tend to retest a whole bunch of stuff when I'm doing CPU group tests. So got some Corsair Dominator Platinum RGB in here as well. Looks really good. Pretty tall memory though, which might not serve everybody But yeah, this is the motherboard, and as you can see, there's a whole load of stuff that needs to be removed off here. We've got the whole M.2 and audio stack down here. That all needs to go. The I/O panel with the VRM fan and VRM plates, that all needs to go as well. So it's not an easy thing to do. A couple of the other monoblocks that I've looked at recently for modern mini-ITX motherboards are much easier, for the simple reason that they basically just sit on existing heatsinks, which is maybe not a great idea, but we will check out those in future videos, so don't forget to subscribe to take a look at those. But for now, what we'll do is just dismantle the motherboard, and won't spend too long doing it because it's fairly straightforward. So yeah, let's take a look. Okay, so we've removed everything off the motherboard, and the last thing that we need to do is to dismantle this little gubbin here, which is basically the M.2 and audio stack. So what we need to do basically is to remove this heatsink underneath, and there are there's one single replacement support on the new waterblock, which will help support the PCB on top, and also we'll be making use of the vertical risers here as well again. But obviously we don't need any of this down the bottom. We don't need the fan, we don't need the heatsink or anything like that. We just need to get this PCB, the vertical risers here, and also the ribbon cable at the end, which we removed with the plastic pick earlier. So that's what we need to do now. So let's crack on. Okay, so we now have a ready prepped motherboard with a cross-shaped section of thermal paste on there from Thermal Grizzly, included with a water block. A cross shape is generally a foolproof way of ensuring even coverage when pressure is applied. We've then got a single strip of 1mm thermal pad down here, another strip over the VRMs down here, and basically two strips either side to sit on top of the chipset. Now, the only other thing you need to be aware of is the fact that the instructions actually tell you to reuse the backplate that came with the motherboard. As you can see, it does actually make thermal contact with a thermal pad, but the included screws are basically different to what the manual says. So what you get is I think it's about a 5.5mm long M2, just nearly dropped it there, M2.5 screw. So that's fine, but it's not long enough to go through the backplate, through the PCB and into the water block. What you will need is the screw that's actually mentioned in the manual but is not included, which is an M2.5 times 8. So it needs, the thread needs to be 8mm long. I've actually got this one included, that was included with another EK waterblock, I believe I found it, and that fits fine, and you can refit the back plate. The other screw that it tells you to use is actually already included with the motherboard, so you can actually reuse that. The thread types on the waterblock that connect to these two holes here and here are actually slightly different size threads. You'll need the thicker threaded one, the M2.5 for this slot here, I believe, and a different one, slightly thinner thread, I think it's M2 thread for the top slot. So basically the manual isn't exactly correct according to what is in the box at the moment. So I believe EK is going to change that at some point soon, but it says that its thermal testing has been carried out without the backplate in place. So we're going to ditch that for the time being, but again, if you want to use the backplate, you can. There is a screw that you'll remove on the motherboard that is basically the right M2 thread, and the thicker threaded screw that you'll need can probably be purchased online or in a EK spares package or something, and it is this one. It is 8mm long, so times 8, and it is M2.5. That's the screw that you need, and basically a flat head, as you can see there as well. So just bear all that in mind. So we will go ahead now and install the water block on top, and then we'll hook it up underneath. Helps if you get it the right way around. And we can just drop it down there onto the CPU, and should line up. There's a little bit of wiggle room if you need to adjust it underneath so the threads line up with the holes, but that is pretty much it. And as we can see here, completely devoid of any kind of circuitry down here where the M.2 and audio header sit. We will fit those in a minute once we've secured the water block. Okay, so we've flipped the motherboard over now, as per the instructions, and you can either just keep your memory in there and just hold it. It doesn't take too long to do. Alternatively, you can just take the the actual memory modules out and just rest the whole thing on a solid object. I kind of want to show you what I'm doing here, so I'm going to hold it at the same time. So here is the EK exact mount, and what I usually do if I'm dealing with VRMs as well with a water block or a monoblock like this, what I'll do is just loosely tighten these things first, so it just kind of holds the water block in place, and that means that there's not too much pressure being applied on the water block on the CPU area, which can kind of lift it away from those two screw holes, even over here. So if you, what can happen is that the water block is raised away from these holes and the screw threads don't quite reach. So what I would do here is, as you can see, just finger tighten these ones very, very loosely, just to hold the water block in place, because what you don't want to do is have the full weight of the water block dangling from these two screws, which are kind of offset to the side, because it can potentially rip those screws out or bend them from one side. So this is the way to do it. Just lightly tighten those screws so the water block is held in place, but it can still rock a little bit if needed as you're tightening those VRM screws. So we'll go ahead and do all that now. Okay, so here we are with the block installed for the first time, and that looks absolutely awesome. The only thing you're going to need to watch is the weight of this thing, because it is pretty hefty once you've got all this copper on there. So just make sure you don't drop it and that it's well secured in your mini-ITX case. So now all we need to do is to reconnect the M.2 and audio stack and reinstall the I/O cover, and we'll be good to go. Okay, so the thermal results are in, and the monitoring software I used is HW Monitor, for the simple reason that it seems to pick up way more sensors than a hardware monitor or a bunch of other stuff. Unfortunately, there's no obvious VRM readout here, which is a bit of a shame, so I would have liked to have compared the VRM temperatures, but even the ASUS software and EFI don't list VRM temperatures, which is a bit of a pain. So what we'll have to do here is just basically go on the CPU temperature and the chipset temperature, compare the two and see what we're dealing with here. I mean, basically every single monoblock and VRM waterblock for that matter that I've tested, which is probably dozens over the years, has always resulted in lower VRM temperatures, so I have absolutely no doubt that that is the case here as well, for the simple reason that the motherboard was under full load for 20 minutes to get these tests and it didn't fall over. So yeah, I would say with a extremely high degree of certainty that the VRM temperature is going to be a hell of a lot lower with the monoblock than it is with the CPU only waterblock and chipset fans. So to start with then, the first temperature that we come to is the CPU temperature, or CPU package, as you can see here, and that is at a peak of 68 degrees C in the first set of results here, which is with the CPU only waterblock. And moving to the monoblock, the temperature is actually 3 degrees lower at maximum, so the maximum here is 65. Now there was a couple of degrees difference in the ambient temperature. It was slightly cooler when I tested the monoblock, so basically the delta T, the difference between the ambient temperature and the absolute temperature reported here is about 2 degrees, which basically means the blocks are within 1 degree of each other, which is actually really good news, because it means that the monoblock offers pretty much the same performance, maybe even a touch better than the ASUS ROG Strix X570-I with the dedicated water blocks. So you're not losing any performance using the monoblock, which is fantastic news, because in the past we have seen a slight drop, or a slight increase rather, in temperature, a slight drop in performance, but the performance here indicates that that is no longer the case, and your CPU will be pretty much the same temperature with the monoblock as it is to one of EK's standard CPU water blocks. So the next temperature we want to concern ourselves with is the chipset temperature, and as you can see, night and day here, even taking into account the slight difference, a degree or two in ambient air temperature, there's still, as near as damn it, a 20-degree difference between the chipset when it's air cooled using the onboard fans and when it is water cooled. So not only does that mean that the chipset is a lot cooler, which is better for it and any kind of high throughputs you'll be having through the chipset, but it's also obviously the biggest deal here is the fact that we've got rid of those fans and we are removing the chipset fan noise from the situation, as well as the VRM fan. So both of those fans gone, the motherboard was significantly quieter, especially under load, and you're going to notice that in the water cooling system as well. Mine is tuned down to have the fans right down and the pump as well via the PWM control. With the FLT reservoir that I've got in this build, it's very quiet under low to medium loads, but those fans really do make the PC a lot noisier. So overall, the performance is excellent from this monoblock. CPU temperature on par with a standard CPU only water block, chipset significantly cooler, and while we don't have a direct VRM temperature readout here, it's undoubtedly a lot cooler as well. So what do we make of EK's monoblock for the ASUS ROG Strix X570-I gaming then? Well, for me, I think it's an absolutely essential bit of kit, whether you already own this motherboard and plan on having your water-cooled PC for a while yet, or you're planning on upgrading from an older Ryzen setup to this motherboard and plan on water cooling your PC. The fact that you can get CPU cooling that is on par with a standard water block, for example, in my situation, it was the EK Velocity, absolutely on par with that. And you get to water cool your VRMs and chipset and get rid of two fans, the two noisy fans on this motherboard. It means it's an absolutely fantastic upgrade for owners of this board. Price-wise, 160 euros, we're looking at something that is reasonably expensive, but not too bad considering how complicated it is, as we saw earlier. And there are CPU-only water blocks out there that cost even more than that. So really, it's not that bad of a deal, and I still consider it, even at that price, to be an essential upgrade for water-cooled PCs that use this motherboard. So in terms of negative sides to the monoblock, it is pretty complicated. You will need to completely dismantle the motherboard, and that may put some people off. If you've done this kind of thing before, like dismantling the motherboard to install VRM water blocks, or maybe even previously dealt with monoblocks, you will be very, very familiar with the process. It's maybe a little bit more involved with this board because it is a complicated motherboard at the end of the day, but it's fairly straightforward. I didn't have any problems. Just remember, don't reuse the backplate with the included screws, which the instructions show. Just make sure that you don't try and use the original backplate and you'll be fine. And that all kind of brings me on to the fact that I would love to see more water blocks from other manufacturers, including EK, because what I'm hoping here is that they've seen the light and they've seen the benefit of having flagship products like this, and there are a couple of other manufacturers that make them at the moment, but we haven't really seen anything released very recently at all. There's nothing, as far as I'm aware, for the Z690 chipset, not even for the Z590 chipset on the Intel side of things. There are a couple for B550 and X570, and I will be looking at all of those in future videos. So don't forget to like, comment and subscribe on this video. Subscription are particularly important, as well as turning on those notifications, because you'll be notified of when I upload those new videos and you can take a look and make sure you don't miss them. So yeah, I would just love to see more monoblocks because I think they're fantastic bits of kit for mini-ITX systems. Just means that you can not have to worry about the heat on your mini-ITX motherboard, especially in cases such as this, which are ultimately a little hotter running, a little bit more cramped than your standard ATX tower. So that's it from me. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe and turn on those notifications, and I will be back with some more videos very soon. Thanks for watching.